day to everyone joining us, and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled Integrating the Clinical Enterprise with Innovative Cloud Technology. My name is Andrew Juranen, and I'll be your X-Talks host for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes, and this presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive, so please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. This chat box is located in the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and if you require any assistance, please contact me at any point by sending a message using the chat panel. And at this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode, and the presentation slides will advance automatically for you. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available for future download. And at this point, I would like to thank Omnicom, who have helped develop the content for this presentation. Omnicom Systems is dedicated to helping the world's pharmaceutical, biotechnology, CROs, research, and medical device organizations maximize their value for their clinical research investments through the use of innovative and progressive technologies. Omnicom's electronic data capture and e-clinical technologies have been used in over 4,000 clinical trials around the globe. And now I would like to introduce our first speaker for today's event. Kino Vanderpost is responsible for the global sales and marketing teams at Omnicom Systems. Prior to joining Omnicom, he spent over 3 years at Oracle in the Health Sciences Global Business Unit, where he managed channel partners in both EMEA and Latin America. Prior to Oracle, Kino was responsible for sales of Metadata's Rave across Northern Europe. Kino has a research background, earning his PhD from Liverpool University in 2000. And our second speaker for today, Keith Howells, has 20 years experience in the application of information technology to the drug development process. He's responsible for the innovation for the Trial Master product line and eClinical suites. Prior positions for Keith were as head of development for Metadata Solutions and as head of development for Oracle Clinical. Our third speaker for today, Ken Light, is responsible for leading Omnicom's professional services team focused on delivering business transformation and technology customization. Prior to joining Omnicom, Ken was a solutions partner at Business Edge Solutions, where he oversaw the delivery of technology, strategy, and process improvement services for pharmaceutical and life sciences companies seeking to accelerate clinical development. Prior to that, he was Practice Director, Life Sciences Consulting for Oracle Corporation, where he oversaw clinical software implementation activities for major pharmaceutical and life science organizations. Before joining Oracle, Ken was Practice Director, Clinical Technology for First Consulting Group, where he established centers of excellence focused on clinical trial and adverse events IT solutions. And now, without further ado, I would like to hand the mic over to Kino Vanderpost. Kino, you can begin your presentation when ready.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew, and welcome everybody. Let's just take a quick look at the agenda for today's presentation. I'm going to set a little bit of context around our view of cloud technology, talking a little about what's happening out in the industry at the moment. Keith will then take over talking about technological considerations, really giving you a better understanding of cloud and focusing a lot on one of the key aspects of it, which is interoperability. We'll hand over to Ken, and Ken's going to take you through looking at the planning of a move into cloud and really the road to adoption and what you should be looking out for and how we see other organizations moving into this particular space. And then I'll take over again at the end and just give a brief little summary before we move into a Q&A session. So looking at the industry at the moment, the key word really is scrutiny. The whole industry is under extreme scrutiny. whether it's the safety of drugs. Of course, patient safety is the #1 concern out there, or it's to do with the economic conditions, the costs of new drugs, and certainly organizations like NICE in the UK have been very focused for some years now on seeing new drugs that come to market have a greater degree of efficacy than their nearest competitor and match that to an appropriate price point. So really the pharmaceutical companies are under incredible pressure, particularly for the fact as we've seen that a lot of the larger pharmaceutical companies are seeing a lot of patents dropping off. The blockbusters are not giving them the revenue that they've had previously, and we're seeing that R&D budgets are starting to be cut. So it's in the news daily. We're all aware of it, and scrutiny is really coming externally but also internally. And if we have a look at some of the internal scrutiny that companies and organizations are currently facing, we can see that you've got a lot of situations in organizations where departments are acting almost like their own companies. They're making their own discrete decisions about technology that they use. They often operate independently. There's little communication. There's little in the way of shared goals. Often they're completely misaligned, the goals between different departments. And there's often replication of the same type of technology in multiple instances of it across a particular organization. So there's a lot of inefficiencies. And with that come the usual sort of add-ons to this, which is overly complex workflows and far too much overhead, a disproportionate amount of expensive overhead. So the move now in the industry is to find broad-based effectiveness, how they can break down these silos, how they can increase operational effectiveness and efficiency. A recent poll gave some interesting results done by IDG last year, and it was really around garnering opinion of the value of cloud-based applications and what they brought in the e-clinical space. And you can see that it's really led by the access to critical business data. The industry is wanting to make faster and better and higher quality decisions in order to facilitate getting better quality drugs to market faster and as economically efficiently as possible. But part of this process just isn't about the technology giving access to that data. It's about allowing employees to collaborate better. It's breaking down these operational silos. And the catalyst of this is really seen as IT. And the reason that IT is seen as this catalyst is because it's relying on the most innovative technology to be able to facilitate all of this. And in order to do that in the most effective manner, IT has to be flexible. And the cloud enables IT departments to be far more agile in having access and delivery of particular items of technology within the e-clinical space. So really, there are some very strong benefits towards moving towards cloud. Keith will be giving you an overview of the different types of cloud in a moment, so I'm not going to focus on that. But provided that the deployment and the roadmap for this is properly planned and executed, the cloud will provide significant savings. You will have far less maintenance costs because you're outsourcing a lot more. You should have far lower implementation costs as a result of that. Also, you don't need to anymore go through these very heavy, highly structured procurement processes for capital equipment. You can move to an operational expense procurement done on a monthly basis. And in fact, one of the things that we offer as an organization is a cost model based around per site month, which should allow you to actually match your business needs and usage a lot more effectively. It should be scalable. Doesn't matter whether you're doing one study or 100 studies, a proper cloud environment will allow you to scale as and when you need to. As I've mentioned before, you have these lower maintenance costs, and now cloud is at a point, it's very well established. Resiliency and redundancy have been proven, and you should be expecting that. So I think that leads us to our first polling question. So back over to you, Andrew.
Great. Thank you very much, Kino. We certainly do have our first polling question of 3 for today. And you can vote on this in real time by clicking on your screen. The question we have for you: How do you describe your knowledge of the benefits and implementation value derived from the cloud? Your options are just beginning to familiarize myself. Another option, relatively familiar, familiar, or very familiar. Again, that question. How do you describe your knowledge of the benefits and implementation value derived from the cloud? All right, it looks like most of you have voted at this point. I'm going to close polling now and share the results. Looks like 46% of you said you're just beginning to familiarize yourselves. 31% said you're very familiar, and 15% said familiar, while just 8% of you said relatively familiar. And with that, I'll turn the mic over to Keith Howells.
Great. Thank you very much, Andrew. Interesting poll results. Hopefully we have something for both of the groups who are just getting started and those who already know a lot. I'll be covering the technology considerations in moving to the cloud. We'll just start with a standard definition, list the operational advantages, and then talk about how to integrate different applications and how, even though they're in the cloud, they can still share data with each other. And then, of course, these all have to be compliant, so we'll talk about the issues for regulatory compliance of applications hosted in the cloud. So we think the most accurate definition comes from NIST. I'll just read highlights of it. On-demand network access to a shared pool of resources, which can be servers, can be finished applications, and corresponding services, rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort. So instead of, oh, I need this application, I've got to go buy a server, I've got to install the server, I've got to install my software on that, I have to validate that software is installed properly, okay, maybe 6 months' time I can start using it, versus, hey, contract with a vendor of some system, you get a URL and you could start using it tomorrow. So the whole idea is whether it's physical infrastructure or finished applications, it's all just out there somewhere and you can just buy as much of it as you want without really knowing where that application is hosted. In the same way you could log on to Amazon.com, you don't know where it is, you just know it works when you need it. So here's a simple example in our space. We can access from a desktop or a laptop, bottom left, or increasingly from mobile devices, both tablets and smartphones. The best is if these can log on through a portal so that there's just a set of links where you press on the one you want, but that's not necessary. If you don't have the portal, then you would just typically bookmark each of the URLs you need to go to for the different systems. They're all hosted out there in the cloud, and the dotted lines indicate they are loosely coupled. That means that they can interact with each other, but their only transport mechanism for interacting with each other is over the same internet that you are using to physically log on. And we'll see in a slide or two how that challenges some of the data sharing mechanisms that might have been used historically. In terms of operational advantages, obviously it means you need fewer IT staff. We've been trying to hire a DBA for months. They're hard to find. It's nice if someone else takes care of things like that for you. Lower validation requirements. You're doing a qualification that the application meets your business needs rather than having to do a formal validation, so that can be done order of magnitude faster. You can spin these things up very quickly. If you contract with someone like Microsoft, you can say, okay, I want a server of this size with Windows and SQL Server on it. You could literally have that within a minute or two of asking. The technology stack stays fresher. These vendors are motivated to stay current because they're competing with each other. For in-house systems, it's quite common to find the stack gets stale. You get new release of something, but some other application on the same server still needs the old release, and next thing you know, you're a couple of generations behind, and now you don't support the latest mobile device, the latest browser version, and so forth. It's much easier to mix and match application selection according to particular therapeutic area or study needs. So if you want a different IVRS for a particular study, as long as it will interact with the rest of your suite, you can just do that. And then because the cloud is neutral, then implicitly sharing with partners and CROs is automatic. You don't have to worry about granting them access inside your infrastructure and all those firewall and user permission challenges. Now, a lot of things get better, a couple of things get harder. Let's talk about that. So let's start looking on the left. Inside the firewall, where you might have two applications, let's say system 1 is an EDC system, system 2 is a clinical trials management system, each hosted on a web server with a database behind it, and you're inside the firewall, you could log on to both and get your work done. And because everything's inside the firewall, you're allowed to copy things from one environment to another. So you can copy files from one server to another. So maybe you extracted some things from your EDC system, and now you go load that into your CTMS. Well, it's very easy to get that file from one to the other because all of those servers are on the same domain. Or similarly, you might be able to go database to database. So you might have a data warehouse that's just vacuuming up source data on some schedule, and again, one database can see another database because they're all within the same domain. All the permissions are fine. Outside the firewall, you've got this zigzag line, the internet, that is walling these systems off from each other, and so they can't do these things anymore. You can't do a database copy, and you can't do a file copy because, again, you don't share a domain. The only mechanism you've got is the public internet. So how do you get these things still done? Because you still need to do it. You still need to take summary data out of one system, put it in your CTMS, and so forth. Well, there are two standard approaches for cloud-based system. One is file transfer, and the other is APIs. For file transfer, that will typically use secure FTP, secure file transfer protocol, and send a file from one environment to another. This is most useful for high data volumes, lab data, data warehouse population, whatever, of low frequency, daily or weekly, that kind of thing. So again, if you were looking at lab data for 1,000 patients in a study, you would want to transfer that by flat file. Application program interfaces are for more immediate transactions. So they're low data volumes. It might be one subject record, one form, one randomization record, or whatever, where you want immediate transfer and error checking. It's much harder to get a feedback loop from a file transfer than from an API call, where the calling program can say, did you get it? And if you did, here's your next message. And so that kind of handshaking is much easier to implement using these APIs. And these APIs will use something called web services, which is a mechanism by which programs can communicate with each other over the same internet that you're using for an interactive connection. So let's look at a couple of pictures of how each of those might work. So this is the file transfer example. Let's say our source system is some LIMS system that's just got a whole load of lab data for your study. It will typically produce an ASCII file of some predefined format, patient visit, sample date, white blood cells, red blood cells, and so forth. And it will transfer that to this SFTP directory, which is very similar to just dragging a file from one part of your desktop to another under Windows Explorer. You can see this directory in the sky, if you like, and you can drop a file there. And then that FTP directory will be trawled by a listener process, which will detect those files landing and know what to do with them. So whether it's intelligence in the file name or intelligence in the directory name, it says, oh, I've got a hematology file here. I know what to do with that. Validates it, loads it up, puts some error log somewhere, and for the data that's valid, it makes it immediately available, say, to the EDC system on the right. So the beauty of this is, even though you've only got the internet connecting these two systems, you could still transfer large amounts of data on a scheduled basis without manual intervention. You need these things to be scalable. You set it up on a schedule, it just runs, and the only manual intervention is there's some error that someone has to go look at. The next is where you need this immediate handshaking and more interactive error checking. So an example here, the left-hand side might be an IVR where you've just got a new patient. The right-hand side might be an EDC that needs to know about that new patient. Well, these web services programs work the same way as a browser accessing a web page. They will say, hey, I'm sending this call into this URL, but the thing at the other end isn't a web page, it's another program. And we'll send in the content as an XML package. which looks a little like HTML, and that will have the content that the other side needs to know. So if the call says, hey, I've got a new patient for you, then the content will be the patient number and the initials and the registration date and anything else that it needs to know. That receiving program will process it, will send back a HTTP error code to indicate whether it's success or failure, and can send back an XML message that might just be a success message, but it might be, hey, here's the internal ID that I assigned for this patient because you need to know that on the next call. So you can get interactive programs going on here that says, oh, okay, now I know you've swallowed that new patient. Here's the randomization number for that patient. So these things can happen near enough real time, certainly within a matter of seconds of something happening on the left-hand side. The system on the right-hand side can have received and processed that. So let's look at a couple of real examples. These are all production implementations. They're not all implemented for exactly the same study, but for various studies, all these things are working in production. So the first one is this IVR integration. We work with a number of vendors. One we quite like is a company called Veracity Logic. And they can send us new subject information, new randomization information, so it lands in TrialMaster and the EDC application, again, within a few seconds. So then someone could go log into the EDC application and say, okay, now my patient is here, I'm going to finish off the demographics and put in the vital signs and so forth. And then on the output side, we have an integration with a product called ClinPay from ClinVerse that does payments. And this can again be done through a web service call. So as soon as, say, you've monitored a visit, you could set that record out and it could be scheduled for payment the next day. We all know there's challenges with site motivation, and part of that is how long it takes from when they provide the service to when they get paid. It can be months today. Imagine the new world where you could say, clean up your queries today and you'll be paid tomorrow. Maybe they would find that kind of compelling. Some flat file examples, very common for lab data to come in, ASCII files, and loaded. And then in the EDC application, you indicate for high and low values whether that's clinically significant or not. Obviously, the lab system doesn't know, but the user in the EDC system can know. So all the hard work of getting the lab data is done for you. There's no typing there, but someone can say, this value, 10% above upper limit high is or is not clinically significant. And then bottom left, we can broadcast SDTM data sets. That is the standard for data outputs. It is requested today by the FDA for submissions and will be mandatory within a few years. So any kind of data warehouse, data graphing applications these days will take SDTM as a standard fee because that means they can talk to anything. We like a product called Patient Profiles, which does very nice visual plots of patient data, so you can see study timelines with dosing windows and adverse events and lab data and so forth. And they have a very fascinating tool which can be used for central monitoring, which will detect suspicious data. This looks too high, this looks too low, this looks too constant across visits, and can provide feeds of suspicious data that could go to your monitors for their next monitoring visit. And again, that could happen the next day. So based on the data that went in today, here's what the monitor should look at tomorrow. Finally, let's talk about regulatory compliance. So the application vendors have their standard responsibilities to validate the application, prove there are requirements, prove there are test cases that test the requirements, and those test cases all pass, to qualify the hardware and the infrastructure, to validate the installation and all subsequent upgrades and patches and so forth, and provide trained personnel to operate the production environment. So that's all bread and butter software as a service requirements. The customer obviously needs to audit the application vendor to be sure they have good processes and they are actually following them. But for each application, there's just a certification that meets business requirements, which again is an order of magnitude less effort than doing a validation. So you can often have that work in parallel with initial team training and so forth, so it never gets on the critical path, versus typically months and months to validate an in-house install. And then for each study, there's a standard UAT process, check all your edit checks work, and so forth. Now, there's one other aspect if you go a whole hog to a public cloud. So first, a couple more definitions. A private cloud is still a cloud, and you just get a URL and log on and do your work. But if you go to that vendor, they say, oh, that application is hosted out of this data center. You can go audit it. You can check the administrators have been trained and so forth. A public cloud would be a service like Microsoft Azure or from Amazon Web Services, where they say, look, we've got 20 data centers around the planet, and it'll be in one of them. And you don't have to know where it is. But then we have this Part 11 requirement that people who maintain electronic record systems have to have the education and training to prove they can do that. And it's now an extra challenge to prove that if you don't know who they are, because you don't know where your data is. So we just want to flag this as kind of an open, heated discussion going around the industry is, can you meet this Part 11 requirement if you physically don't know where your data is? It basically requires that the organizations such as Microsoft basically vouch for all their employees. It says, look, part of providing this service, we vouch that all our admins are trained, all our DBAs are trained, and so forth. And interestingly, there is some precedent in the Affordable Care Act and healthcare regulations that defines a person as could be an organization. So in the twin environment of healthcare, there's actually already a precedent set. Whether the FDA just says, yep, that's fine by me as well, or whether they'd be more cautious is an open question. So let me just finish with a checklist. Again, we think cloud computing is better, it's more flexible, it's cheaper, but you need to be careful that you can still have your data managed securely and safely and all those things. So here's a simple checklist we'd advocate. Obviously, the applications can be hosted. A portal is a nice to have, but not a necessary. That applications can still talk to other applications either via secure FTP transfer or web services. And should you see disk ODM if possible, because that tends to make the integration much faster to develop, because both engines, both the transmitting engine and the receiving engine, should already know how to speak CDisk ODM. So you're just figuring out what the actual messages are, what the actual item IDs are, and possibly some vendor extensions on that ODM standard. The applications have to be validated, that they're in a secure, compliant data center, that you've got backups and you've got access controls and those kind of things, and then the production support staff are adequately trained, so no one is fishing around unauthorized in your database. But then it's the good news is once you've done that for a particular vendor, then you're going to get those same answers regardless of the number of studies. So after that initial investment, the ongoing spin-up cost is negligible. So with that, let me hand back to Andrew for our second polling question.
Great, thank you, Keith, for that. We certainly do have a second polling question appearing on the screens of the audience right now. And this time you can actually click to vote on multiple answers here if you'd like. The question we have for you, what are the most important criteria in your eClinical Cloud implementation decision? Your options today are data quality, validation, security, total cost of ownership, and your last option there, vendor reputation. You can click on multiple answers, don't forget here. That question again, what are the most important criteria in your eClinical Cloud implementation decision? Looks like most of you have voted at this point. I'm going to close polling now and share the results with you. There we have it. Looks like the most popular answer there was security. That was followed by total cost of ownership and data quality, and those were followed by validation, then vendor reputation. And with that, I will hand the mic over to Ken Light. Ken?
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, that question is not surprising. We live in an industry where security and privacy and quality are everything. So without that, we wouldn't be having this conversation today. But that's a kind of a good segue into where I'm going. My goal in this conversation is to talk about what do you do next. And what I saw earlier is that a lot of, more than 50% of the people that are on this call are relatively new to the cloud. So you're probably asking yourself or your organizations are asking, how do we get there and what do we do if we want to move to cloud technology? So just to kind of baseline again, you know, in addition to compliance and cost results, there's new capabilities that you should be able to bring to your organization once you move to a cloud. And key to that, we've talked about things like integration and single point of entry, but you want to have an evolving, ever-evolving solution. And what I mean by that is that as technology changes, as business opportunities change, the industry is moving forward, and what you don't want to do is be left behind because your technology that maybe you made a huge capital expense on that technology at some point in time is holding you back, and that technology is not advancing with the industry. So by moving to a cloud, you have the advantage of being able to pay for your solution, your compliant solution, in a predictable cost model. We call it a consumption-based model. You kind of pay as you go, and then over time, if you need to evolve the technologies that you're using, both in scope and basically capability, that's got to be brought to you by the cloud vendor. Okay, and compliance is without question needs to be in place across the board. This maturity model kind of talks about adopt, transform, and innovate, and the idea being that you don't want to move everything to the cloud overnight. You want to move in a progressive, well-planned approach. And the approach may involve taking some of the systems that you're using today that are core to your business and trying to put those on the cloud, then bringing in additional capabilities, some of the things that Keith talked about, like patient profiles to add value, and then innovate and move your organization to a true organization of e-clinical excellence with things like e-source, risk-based monitoring, implementing some of the initiatives that are being driven by the Transcelerate initiative that's going on within the industry right now. We're at a tipping point in time right now where regulations like e-source and risk-based monitoring that open the door to those, the regulations open the door to e-source and risk-based monitoring, along with innovative technologies like mobile computing, big data, wearable technologies. They're going to change the way we do clinical trials. And if your technology is holding you back, you're not going to be able to move forward with that change. Moving to a cloud solution should help bring you forward to the next level. Okay, so you know, what do you do and how do you move forward? First and foremost, put a team together that includes cross-functional representation from IT, business, and compliance. Make sure you're all on the same page of what you're doing and why you're doing it. If one person thinks it's all about cost, somebody else thinks it's all about compliance, that's going to be an issue. You need to figure out where you are today, where you want to get to, how long it's going to take, and then build a good, solid business case or value proposition around that and identify your success metrics. Next, figure out what is the technology that needs to be selected, and I'm going to talk about that on a future slide, how to go about that. But you want to create a culture of ongoing improvement within your organization. And finally, you know, start the transformation process. Begin implementation, decommission of legacy applications. That can be very tricky. There are some applications that can be decommissioned and moved to a new application very easily. There are other applications where you may have long-going clinical trials with lots of data, and you might need to live with those applications for a long time. What I want to point out, though, is that if you have applications that you have a strong vested interest in sticking with, those don't have to be exclusive to your cloud offering. Those could be included in your cloud offering, even if you're still hosting it, because that's what the cloud is all about. It's about the ability to reach across some of those barriers in a secure, compliant, integrated fashion, and be able to bring legacy applications into the same cloud-based environment with a single use that the newer applications are offering also. So consider a phased approach. Look at core capabilities. Where are some quick hits? What are some things that we can really advance our organization if we do first? Then look at strategic value. Where can we add value to our organization with learning tools, metrics, patient profiles, other visualization capabilities, and then extend beyond that. Look at some of the ancillary tools that you might need, not on every trial, but on some trials for things like IVRS or clinical data warehouse, lab and imaging solutions. And you can even get in, go downstream into regulatory and look at your submissions capabilities and bring those into your cloud. This roadmap is going to be different for every organization, but you don't want to attack everything all at once. Organizational dexterity, what I'm talking about here is making sure that all the right stakeholders from your organization and from your cloud cloud provider organization are in place to help you move forward. So your cloud provider should not just bring technology to the table. The cloud provider should be responsible for things like compliance, global support, training, and also vision. You want to partner with an organization that's going to bring thought leadership to the table and make sure that you're lined up to advance with the broader group of cloud customers. And this is also just a slide that kind of talks about that, the governance, collaboration, and strategic value that is brought to a cloud. What I recommend is a strategic board that's made up of both customers and the cloud organization, where you're continually looking at changes going on within the business, within the regulations, and within technology to try to understand how your organization, how this cloud can move forward. And one of the benefits of using a cloud is by sharing an environment with other sponsors or CROs or other life sciences organizations. You're basically sharing some of the costs of hosting, the cost of compliance, the costs of integration, and at the end of the day, your overall model should be cheaper and higher value to your organization in a compliant way. Choosing your partner, you need to do some current state, future state analysis. I'll go through some of that in a second, I think in a couple slides. But once again, clearly define your goals and objectives and use a vendor that can bring best-of-breed technologies and a culture of continual improvement. Single source does not necessarily mean best solution. Single source can hold you back over time. So, if you're going to do a gap analysis, here's some things to look at. This is very high level. Once you do it in a room with all the correct stakeholders, you actually might come up with a lot of different things. But large clinical data center operations, that's what most current state organizations have in place today, to a cloud-based platform as a service. Moving to the cloud allows your organization to focus on bringing new drugs to market, not on being a technology provider. Tools that are outdated or obsolete, most organizations are still using things that maybe they purchased 5 years ago, 10 years ago, sometimes 20 years ago. The cloud should allow you to get to best-of-breed, future state technologies, and once again, that culture of constant change and constant upgrade. Information today might be captured redundantly. You might have to define a study or define a site in 3 different systems in order to get your work done. If you go to the cloud and things are integrated the way they should be, the way that Keith just talked about, you should have a single source of data, you should have master data, and an integrated workflow so that everybody is relying on the identical definition of each of the components of the clinical trial. Fixed technology overhead costs. So where today you're paying big costs to keep fixed technology in place, and regardless of whether you run 5 trials, 20 trials, or 50 trials in a year, you're going to have to pay the same thing for that technology. with a scalable, consumption-based cost model, you should only pay for what you need on a per annum basis, basically. And lacking full data transparency, cloud should bring you dashboards that kind of go across your broader application set to provide information that includes data from all the different components. Okay, as far as transformation and change, your cloud provider should also be providing you with metrics, metrics that help you measure the value of your technology operation. So, what is the cost on a per trial basis or a per user basis of running a clinical trial? Are you taking advantage of discounts or economies of scale based on doing multiple trials? What are your service metrics? So is the platform available? Is it responding correctly? Are your service calls being answered on a timely basis? Are your sites and your monitors that you're working with, are they satisfied and happy with the technology that's out there? And finally, ease of use. How quickly does data get into the system? How quickly can you lock a database? Are people comfortable? Is accuracy an issue? If accuracy is an issue, then maybe ease of use is not going well. If you're having quality issues and it's being brought on because of the technology, that's a problem. So you want an infrastructure and technology that is easy to use and brings high quality data to the table. So Omnicom, we're offering something called an OmniCloud environment. Kino's going to talk a little bit more about that shortly. But in addition to the technology, what we're bringing to the table are things like 24/7 global support, training in a variety of different methods, management of SLAs to make sure that you get consistent metrics on a regular basis. Management of contracts. Wouldn't it be nice if instead of having to go to 6 different vendors and signing 6 different contracts to be able to put the technology platform together that is required for a clinical trial, you can go to one place and have a standard, scalable, predictive model that you can work with. And finally, transparent upgrades. As the new technology, new versions, new patches come out around different technology stacks, those should be applied for you in a consistent, compliant way so your organization doesn't have to take a big step back in order to make a step forward. Success factors, look for, once again, a more predictable cost model, higher quality using best-of-breed technologies, faster time to market because those technologies are going to make your clinical organization more agile and allow you to focus on your business as opposed to the technology, a more scalable solution so that, once again, you can manage peaks and valleys and global support models on a, the vendor can manage that for you. You don't have to worry about that. Strategic advantage, being able to work with a technology team that's on the cutting edge, allowing you to move to some of the new business and technology innovations quicker and faster. And finally, using dashboards and metrics, a culture of ongoing improvement in your organization. With that said, I'm going to turn it back to Andrew, who's going to, I think, post our third and final customer poll question.
That's right. Thank you very much, Ken, for that. We certainly do have another polling question here on the screen, and you can click on any of those options as you see fit. Our question today, what is the current timeline for implementing a cloud strategy across your organization's clinical applications? Is that within 1 year, greater than 2 years? Is it currently implemented, or are you not certain? That question again, what is the current timeline for implementing a cloud strategy across your organization's clinical applications? All right, a couple more seconds to let you vote there. Looks like most of you have voted now, so I'm going to close polling, share the results with you. And there we have it. 67% of you aren't certain at this point. 17% said greater than 2 years. 8% of you said currently implemented, and another 8% said within 1 year. And with that, I'll turn the mic back final time to Kino Vanderpost.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrew. So yeah, a very interesting result on the poll there, and I think in some ways that actually reflects what we're finding as salespeople at the coalface, talking with people. There are a lot of people are still looking into cloud, seeing what it can do for them, a little bit nervous about it all. There's still a little bit of a lack of understanding there, which I suppose kind of justifies the webinar that we're giving today. So I'm just going to summarize. As Ken had introduced earlier, we have our cloud offering. It's our latest technology offering called OmniCloud. And we are very excited about this. We're very excited to be taking on our passion, which is integration and e-clinical solutions, into this enterprise environment where we're now starting to look at offering clients a specific, their unique flavor of best of breed or best-in-class technology. And we're looking at answering those and solving those key challenges around this. And some of the questions that we're being asked by our clients, how can we meet increased compliance and regulatory demands to reduce complexity, improve quality, and reduce time to submission? OmniCloud is going to answer this. OmniCloud is going to be a solution that's going to help you in overcoming this challenge. How can we maximize the investment we've currently made and improve our efficiency of our existing clinical infrastructure? OmniCloud is going to do that. We can create these hybrid solutions whereby you can look at what you have in-house and start to look at what you can start to ramp up and use in an outsourced mode. And how can technology help us reduce our risk? Again, we can do that both from a business perspective and from a clinical operational perspective. So we're very excited about this, and we do urge you to reach out to us for further information. If I can just look at some of the benefits that the OmniCloud will bring. Really, the first and most important is around interoperability and that flow and exchange of data. If you recall, I was talking about breaking down these operational silos. And really, by integrating your best-in-class applications, we can start to automate a lot more of these isolated business processes and take the complexity out of a lot of these workflows which have built up historically over time across multi-department institutions. Again, some people will look at this and say, okay, that's fine, I can see how that all works, but how do we manage all these vendor relationships? The simple answer is you don't. We take that on board. We will manage all those third-party service level agreements. You will have one central contracting point, and that is with Omnicom. We manage everything in the background. We are a partner-centric organization. We have been for many, many years. Our technology has been completely constructed around being open and interchangeable with other technologies. So we have very well-established relationships with many other technology providers out there in the industry. In terms of business value, clearly we can help you preserve and then enhance your existing investments. And there is a need within this whole infrastructure that you have to be able to measure, as Ken said. Anything that can be measured can be improved. And again, we will offer you metrics around your cloud performance and cloud usage that will help you do just that. And as we move away from the older paradigm of huge procurement costs, very large-scale in-house implementations of key technological components within the e-clinical space, we move to a subscription-based environment where you can look at contracting on a per-site month basis for your technology that really starts to map the way that your business uses technology, rather than having to look at what is our maximum usage and buying up to that level, which is very inefficient. So we can move you towards a consumption-based cost model, and we can also get you to not only a predictable cost model, but something that is secure, a technology that is scalable and compliant, and a technology that is available 24/7, 365 days of the year. So my final slide here is that anybody on this webinar that's going to attend the DIA in San Diego next week, Keith, Ken, and myself will be there. We'd love to meet you. We'd love to continue this discussion further. We're very passionate about this, as you can probably tell. So we're happy to take as much time as you feel you need with us there. Stop by booth 2205. It's near the entrance, near the main entrance of the exhibition hall. And we'll also have some of our other experts for some of our other technologies there on the booth as well. So please feel free to stop by. With that, I will hand over to you, Andrew. Thanks very much.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Kino, and thank you also to Ken and Keith for those great presentations there. I would like to invite our audience to continue sending their questions and comments in right now using that questions window for the Q&A portion of the webinar. And I've received some questions already, so I'll start with the ones we have here. Our first question, do applications in the cloud perform as well as locally hosted applications?
That's Keith here. Let me take that. In general, they should perform better. If you've got an in-house hosted application, it's probably sized for average usage. So if you hit some kind of peak, you might run out of capacity at obviously exactly the wrong time. Whereas out in the cloud, just because you're hitting a peak, you're aggregated with other customers who are maybe not hitting a peak. So the relative impact is much lower. And then it's much easier to spin up extra server capacity in these data centers just geared for that as a regular way of doing business. Second part is network capacity, and again, there's huge investment networks going on anyway. If people are streaming real-time Netflix movies, there's definitely room on those networks for file or lab data. And the point-to-point response time is also getting better. So where it used to be, if you had a data center in the US and using the Far East, they might see some more sluggish delay. Broadly, that is no longer the case.
Great. Thank you for that. Our next question here, how easy is it to build a new integration between two applications if they both use CDisk format?
Okay, let me take that as well. CDisk is a help, but it's not the whole story. We've done integrations as fast as 3 days. So 3 days from this vendor got the spec to it's working. Others have taken months because the handshaking is much more complicated, or there are extensions required to ODM to send information that ODM itself doesn't have a home for. So it's a help to use ODM, but it's not the whole answer. So I think our recommendation would be, get the vendors talking to each other early on so they can sketch that out. And hopefully it's one of those 3-day efforts, not one of those 3-month efforts.
All right. Thank you for that. Reminder to the audience, just keep sending your questions and comments coming in here. Another question here, what do you see as the resistance and the delay in adopting the cloud in clinical research and development as compared to enterprise applications?
Okay, let me take that, Andrew. So I think what we're seeing in discussions with our clients and potential clients is that the resistance is around the fact that this is very, very new. There is a transfer of trust from within a traditional model of an IT department within a company having complete control. The software solutions are residing on traditionally the infrastructure within that company, and they're now starting to think about, well, okay, it's not just 1 or 2 additional applications that we're looking to outsource on some remote service with another partner. We're actually looking at doing the whole thing. So it's a far bigger exercise in trust, and I think the market is moving towards it. I think one of our poll questions there actually did gauge the opinion that really reflects what's happening out there in the greater domain, and we're seeing a trend towards a greater uptake and a greater transfer of more technology out of traditional in-house IT departments out into the cloud.
All right, thank you for that. Another question here, what are some concerns that I should be aware of regarding security concerns?
Let me take the first pass at that. So you've basically got to break it down into just regular user ID security, so people writing their passwords down where they shouldn't, or they got the same password across every one of these products, because that's the only way they can remember it. And obviously you need to be sure that whoever is signing on is indeed that person. And then you've just got the application security. So if I attack that website, or I try to fool it to not do password authentication, or I try and get into a piece of the system that I'm not allowed in with my role privileges, can I do that? There are vendors out there you can contract with to run what's called a penetration test. And they just got these programs and these scripts, and you give them a website, and they will attack it and come back and tell you if they found any vulnerabilities and the severity of those. So I guess that would be an interesting thing to add to the checklist is, has your application vendor run a penetration test, and can those results be shared?
Interesting. Okay, thank you for that. Another question. Can you use the cloud and still maintain Part 11 compliance?
I can take that one. This is Ken. So you have to remember that Part 11 was introduced back in 1997 because of the advent of the Internet. And the FDA understood that organizations were going to move to a more public environment and a more open environment for running applications that contain sensitive clinical trial and research information. So that hasn't changed with the cloud. We're still out there in an open environment, but possibly your data is actually stored, on a cloud vendor instead of inside your own data center. But all the rules and regulations and requirements around security and audit trail and validation and training and SOPs and other business processes still need to be followed and need to be maintained. As opposed to implementing it yourself, you need to audit your cloud vendors to make sure that they're maintaining that same level of compliance and security around your data.
Right, right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We have reached the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar. If you do have any further questions, you can please direct them to Kino Vanderpost via the email address showing on your screen right now. Thank you, everyone, for participating in today's conference. You will be receiving a follow-up email from Xtalks with access to the recorded archive for this event, and a survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated as it will help us improve our further webinars. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers for today, Keith Howells, Ken Light, and Kino Vanderpost. We hope that you found this conference informative today. Have a great day, everyone.